forbear for ever so little of iris trees and lily o'ragans, concerning the genesis of Harold or Humphrey Chimpton's occupational agnomen. We are back in the pre-surnames, prodromerith period. Of course, just when Enos chalked hogtraps, and discarding once for all those theories from older sources which would link him back with such pivotal ancestors as the Glues, the Gravies, the Northeasts, the Anchors, and the Earwickers of Sidless Sham in the 100 of manhood, or proclaim him offsprout of Vikings who had founded Wapentake and settled him in Herrick or Eric. The best authenticated version, the Dumlat, read the reading of Hafid ben Adar, has it that it was this way. We are told how in the beginning it came to pass that like cabbaging Cincinnatus, the grand old gardener was saving daylight under his redwood tree one sultry Sabbath afternoon, Hag Chivichas Eve, in pre-fall paradise peace, by following his plough for rootles in the rare garden of Mob House, the old Marine Hotel, when royalty was announced by Runner to have been pleased to have halted itself on the high road, along which a leisure-loving dog-fox had cast fault, also at walking pace, by a lady pack of cocker spaniels. Forgetful of all save his vassal's plain fealty to the ethnarch, Humphrey or Harold stayed not to yoke or saddle, but stumbled out, hot-faced as he was, his sweatful bandana loose from his pocket coat, hastening to the forecourts of his public in toupee, sore-singled, soulless scarf and plaid +4s, puttees and bulldog boots ruddled cinnabar with flagrant marl, jingling his turnpike keys, and bearing aloft amid the fixed pikes of the hunting party a high perch atop of which a flower pot was fixed, earthside hoist with care. On his majesty, who was, or often feigned to be, noticeably long-sighted from green youth, and had been meaning to inquire what, in effect, had caused yon causeway to be thus potholed, asking substitutionally to be put wise as to whether paternoster and silver doctors were not now more fancy bait for lobster trapping. Honest, blunt Harumphrield answered in no uncertain tones, very similarly, with a fearless forehead, "Aye, your naggers, we're just a cotton o' mun bluggy earwuggers." Our sailor king, who was draining a guglet of obvious Adam ale. Gift both and Gorban. Upon this, ceasing to swallow, smiled most heartily beneath his walrus moustaches, and indulging that none too genial humour which William the Conk on the spindle side had inherited, with the hereditary whitelock and some short-fingeredness from his great-aunt Sophie, turned towards two of his retinue of gallow glasses, Michael, Etheling Lord of Leeks and Offaly, and the Jubilee Mayor of Drogheda, El Cock, the two scatterguns being Michael and Manning Protosyndic of Waterford, and an Italian excellency named Jubilee, according to a later version cited by the learned scholar Canavan of Can Make Noise. In either case, a triptychal religious family, symbolising puritas of doctrina, business per usuals, and the porty patch of Hamlock where the paddish pretties grow, and remarked dulcely, "Holy bones of St. Hubert, how our red brother of Porrin Grania would audibly fume did he know that we have a Sir Trusty bailiwick, a turn piker who is by turns a pike baler, no seldomer than an earwigger. For he can jump hill with his court so grey, and his haunts in the house in the morning. One still hears that pebble-crusted laughter, jappy-jap, cheery-cheery. Among the roadside tree, the lady home Patrick planted. Still one feels the massive silence of the clad stone, alleged belling, "I've my outside born." Comes the question, are these the facts of his nominogentalization as recorded and accoladed in both or either of the collateral andropomorphic narratives? are those there fata which we read in Sibylline between the Fas and its Nefas? No dung on the road? And shall Nohomaya be our place like Molochi our king of Ulcan? We shall perhaps not so soon see. Pink ponk that bear for seeks a license where conceptors with centaurs stay. Bear in mind, son of Hochma, if so be you have method in your midness, this man is mountain, and unto changes doth one ascend. Heave we aside the fallacy, as Punicle is finikin, that it was not the king self, but his inseparable sisters, uncontrollable night-talkers, skirts the rays with Donya's egg, who afterwards, when the robbers shut up the socialites, came down into the world as amusers, and were staged by Madame Sudlow as Rosa and Lily Miskinget in the pantomime that two pits patronosed, Myriadardas and Galatea. The great fact emerges that after that historic date, all holographs so far exhumed, initialed by Humphrey, bear the signa HCE. And while he was only in long and always good Duke Humphrey for the younger and spal pains of Luke Elizabeth, and chambers to his cronies, it was equally certainly a pleasant turn of the populace which gave him a sense of those normative letters, the nickname, Here Comes Everybody. An imposing everybody he always indeed looked, constantly the same as and equal to himself, and magnificently well worthy of any and all such universalization. Every time he continually surveyed, amid vociferatings from in front of, except these few nutties, and take off that white hat, relieved with stop his grog, and put it in the log, and lutes in his basmoko boots. From good start to happy finish, the truly Catholic assemblage gathered together in that king's treat house, of satin a lustre like above floats and footlights, from their ass-ball velts and ox gangs unanimously to clap-plod, the inspiration of his lifetime and the hits of their careers, Mr. Wallenstein Washington Semper Kelly's Immergreen Tours in a command performance, by special request, with the courteous permission for pious purposes, the humdrum and enlivened performance of prevalent passion play of the millenary, running strong since creation, A Royal Divorce. Then near the approach towards the summit of its climax, with ambitious interval-bound selections from the Bow Girl and the Lily, on all horsery show, command knights from his vice-regal booth, his boss alone is sealing there a cuckoo spit less eminent than the red ritual hoods of McCabe and Cullen, where a veritable Napoleon the Nth, our world stages practical joke piece and retired Celtic comedian in his own wise, this folk's forefather all of the time sat, having the entirety of his house about him, with the invariable broad-strip kerchief, cooling his whole neck, nape, and shoulder blades, and in a wardrobe panel tuxedo completely thrown back from a shirt well entitled a Swanawall, on every point far out starching the laundered claw hammers and marble-top highboys of the pit stalls and early amphitheatre. The piece was this. Look at the lamps. The cast was thus. See under the clock. Lady circle, cloaks may be left. Pit, promenade, and parterre, standing room only. Habituals conspicuously emergent. A baser meaning has been read into these characters, the literal sense of which decency can scarcely hint. It has been blurtingly bruited by certain wisecrackers. The stinks of Mahomet are in the night plots of the morning, that he suffered from a vile disease. Atma unmanatha. To such a suggestion, the one self-respecting answer is to affirm that there are certain statements which ought not to be, and one should like to hope to be able to add, ought not to be allowed to be made. Nor have his detractors, who, an imperfectly warm-blooded race, apparently conceive him as a great white caterpillar, capable of any and every enormity in the calendar, recorded to the discredit of the Duke and Killicock families, mended their case by insinuating that alternately, he lay at one time under the ludicrous imputation of annoying Welsh Fusiliers in the People's Park. Hey, hook, 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 Vaughan and Florida, on the lee of that little old chuck. to anyone who knew and loved the Christ-likeness of the big, clean-minded giant H.G. Earwicker throughout his excellency long vice-fregal existence. The mere suggestion of him as a lust sleuth nosing for trouble in a booby trap rings particularly preposterous. Truth, beard on prophet, compels one to add that there is said to have been quandam some case of the kind implicating, it is interred and believed, a quidam. If he did not exist, it would be necessary quonium to invent him. About that time, Stambuling around Dumberling and leaky sneakers with his dark record, who has remained topantically anonymous, but let us hew him Abdullah Gamanek Saxi was, it is stated, posted at Malins at the instance of watch warriors of the Vigilance Committee, and years afterwards cries one even greater, Ibid, a commender of the frightful seemingly, unto such as were sullen sated, tropped head, piat, who waiting his first of the month fruits, turn for that chop-pack cabbocks a licky by on the old house for the church arm, roast haddocks off of Harkin Street, lob you blondie liar, gob, see you in the marketplace, and geez, what eateth their home to fire these boils? There's a cab full of bash indeed in the home you're of that meal. Slander, let it lie its flattest, has never been able to convict our good and great, nor ordinary southern Earwicker, that homogeneous man, as a pious author called him, of any graver impropriety than that advanced by some Woodwards or Regarders who did not dare deny the shoulders that they had chin ted, chin tam, chin taffed, consumed the soul of the corn, of having behaved with ungentlemanski immodus opposite a pair of dainty maidservants in the swooth of the rushy hollow, whither, or so the two gown and pinners pleaded, Dame Nature in all innocency had spontaneously at about the same hour of the eventide sent them both, but whose published combinations of silken lame testimonies are, where not dubiously pure, visibly divergent, as wapped from wept, on minor points touching the intimate nature of this, a first offence in vert or venison, which was admittedly an incautious, but at its wildest, a partial exposure, with such attenuating circumstances, Garth and Gadeth Green were soap and brideth girl and abnormal saints within summer. And Jesus Rosh Hashanah, a ripe occasion to provoke it. We can't do without them. Wives rush to the rescues of man will two man while led is the law. Yes, it's a cadam. Vil a pleach, vol a plot. Fick up for flesh nearly a mother no zol flan. If she's Lilith, pull early. Pauline, allow. And Malers a bush, keep black, keep black. Guiltless of much later him, he was clearly, for once at least, he clearly expressed himself as being with still a trace of his erstwhile burr, and hence it has been received of us that it is true. They tell the story, an amalgam as absorbing as calcium chlorides and hydrophobe sponges could make it. How one happy go gusty Ides of April morning, the anniversary, as it fell out, of his first assumption of his birthday suit, and rights in appurtenance to the confusioning of human races. Ages and ages after the alleged misdemeanor, when the tried friend of all creation, Tigerwood Roadstaff to his stay, was billowing across the wide expanse of our greatest park, in his caoutchouc kepi and great belt and hiding sacks and his blaufunks fustian and ironside jackboots and bagafad gaiters and his rubberized Inverness, he met a cad with a pipe. The latter, the luciferate, not the aureolate. Well, the odds are the still Burton dag about in the same straw bamer, carrying his overcoat under his shoulder, sheep side out, with those to look more like a comfy gentleman, and signing the pledge as gaily as you please, hardily accosted him with, Guinness a tartool and Jimmy Dinner House and Finn. A nice how do you do in Pool Black at the time, as some of our old dazers may still tremblingly recall, to ask, could he tell him how much a clock it was that the clock struck? Had he any idea by cockslock as his watch was Brady's? Hesitancy was clearly to be evitated. Execration is cleverly to be on his side. The earwicker of that spur an instant, realising on fundamental liberal principles the supreme importance, nexally and noxally, of physical life, the nearest help relay being Ping Ping KO St. Patrick's Day and the Fenian Rising, and unwishful as he felt of being hurled into eternity right then, plugged by a soft-nosed bullet from the sap, halted, quick on the draw, and replying that he was feeling tipstaff, Q produced from his gun pocket his Jurgensen shrapnel Waterbury, ours by communionism, his by user capture. But on the same stroke, hearing above the skirling of harsh Mother East, Earl Fox Goodman, the bellmaster, over the waste to south, at work upon the 10-ton Tunyon thunderous Tedder Tuller in the speckled church, Cahunan's call, told the inquiring kidder, by Jehovah, it was 12 of 'em sidereal and tankard time, adding, but on, as he bended deeply with smoked sardinish breath to give more pondus to the copper stick he presented, though this seems in some confusion with the chapstuck ginger, which, as being of sours, acids, salts, sweets, and bitters compounded, we know him to have used as chaw for blown muscle, blood, flesh, and vim vital. Whereas the accusation against him had been made, what was known in high quarters as was stated in Morgan's Post by a creature in human form who was quite beneath par, and several degrees lower than your triple-hydred snake. In greater support of his word, it, quaint anticipation of a famous phrase, has been reconstructed out of oral style into the verbal for all time, with ritual rhythmics, increditary quietude, and 2 salmons stuck from successive accounts by Noah Webster in the redaction known as the sayings attributive of H.C. Earwicker. Prize on shillings, postlots free. The flaxen gygas tapped his chromometrum drum, now standing full erect, above the adjacent floodplain, scene of its happening. One burling gauntlet chop stuck in the hook of his elbow by ancient sign law, his gesture meaning pointed at an angle of 32 degrees toward his Duke de Fair's overgrown milestone as fellow to his gauge, and after a rendy present pause averred with solemn emotions, fire. Should you shake, comrade? Me only. Them 5 ones. He is equal combat. I have won straight. Hence my nationwide hotel and creamery establishments, which, for the honours of our mutual daughters, credit me, I am willing to take my stand, sir, upon the monument, that sign of our redemption, any hygienic day to this hour, and to make my hope to my sin finners, even if I get life for it. Upon the open Bible and before the great taskmasters, I lift my hat, and in the presence of the deity itself, and well of Bishop and Mrs. Micken of High Church of England, as of all such have said, my immediate withdwellers, and of every living soul in every corner wheresoever of this globe in general, which useth of my British to my backbone tongue and commutative justice, that there is not one tittle of truth, allow me to tell you, in that purest of fabrications. Gaping gill, swift to meet earth, stern to check self, diagnosing through Eustace tube that it was to make with a markety post-pubral hypotitutionary type of Heidelberg man-like cavern ethics, lofted his slope and forward, bad sweat of God, good morrow, and double notch onto it as he was greedily obliged, and, like a sensible ham, with infinite tact in the delicate situation, seeing the touchy nature of its perilous theme, thanked him for guilders received and time of day. Not a little talking about all the same, that was how the God's clock it was. And upon humble duty to greet his tisk minister, and he shall gild a gapgaper, and thee his mouldy voids, went about his business, whoever it was, saluting corpses. As a matter of course, one could hail them out had one hair to, for the monticles of scalp and dandruff droppings blaze his trail, accompanied by his trusty snorter and his permanent reflection. Third gracious, I have met with you bored too late, or if not too warm and early, and with tag for Eldiot, repeated in his second-mouth language as many of the big-timers' verbatim words which he could baldly call to memory that same Kvel Eve. Ere the hour of the twattering of bards and the twitter-litter between Druidia and the deep sleep sea, when suppertide and souvenir to Charlotte and Maud jointly came gently, and along the quiet darkenings of Grand and Royal, crept the hedge, when as to many a soft tongue's parky talk mewed answer who softer pogio, Vanda always acquiescent, while, studying castells in the blown and studying cowshots over the Norren, he spat. Careful convertedness, a mosaic dispensation about his hearthstone, if you please. Irish saliva, Masha the Holy. But would a respectable, prominently connected fellow of either European ascendances with well-dressed ideas, who knew the correct things, such as Mr. Shall we sigh or Mr. Shall we laugh, expectorate after such a callous fashion? No, thank yous. When he had his belcher spucker tuck in his pocket, fuck, Muse fed with his sockets after having supped of the dish sot and pottage, which he snobbishly dabbed peach Bombay, it is really only Luke and Took and pie, which he knows which sin after and pibered him, a supreme of excelling peas, bawled under Minshog's milk into white malt wine sour, Provy and the little bilker horsely relished chaffet in the snever season, being as fair not as a rat with fennel. And on this celebrating occasion of the happy escape, for a crowning of pot valiants, this regional platter, Benjamin the Bouillie, with a Scottish olive to middle-pointed zenith, was marrying itself porco grasso, erebusked very deluxiously with a bottle of Phoenix Brewery 98, followed her second nuptials by a peace porter, grand cur, of both of which cherished table lights, though humble the banquet is a layman's farewell. He obdurately sniffed the cobweb-crusted corks. Our cads bit a strife, me Bernie smacks Welton, with a quick ear for spittoons, as the aftertale hath it. Glaned up as usual with domestic husbandry, no persix in her melians for thee, Pomerania. But, slipping the clave in her claw, broke of the matter among 111 others in her usual curtsy. Of fate, these first vespers womanly are, a secret pigliando, a man the levity dead of their man Foker. The next night nudge one as was Hegesippus over a hup of chili, her eyes dry and small and speech thicklish, because he appeared a funny colour like he couldn't study out hens no longer, to her particular reverend, the director, whom she'd been meaning in her mind primarily to speak with, ask inter just a tablespoon, trusting between couple lips and Annie Laurie promises. Might she never have Esnakerdy pudding come humming up for her peckler piskins, that the gossiper so delivered in his epistolier, buried teetotally in their Irish stew would go no further than his Jesuit's cloth. Yet, in Vinars Veritas Volatilis Valetotum, it was this overspoiled priest, Mr. Brown, disguised as a Vincentian, who, when seized of the facts, was overheard in his secondary personality as a Nolan and under-eared told soul by accident. If that is the incident, it was an accident. For here the row of Eclectiastes of Hippo outpuffs the waitress of Have a Banana to pianissime, a slightly varied version of Crooked Ribs Confidentials, what Mary Louise said, but for Josephine's sake, hands between hands, in fealty sworn, my braver best, my flower, and to the strains of the secret of her birth, hushly pierce the ruby and arillum of one Philly Thurston, a lay teacher of rural science and orthophonetics, of a near-stout figure in about the middle of his 40s, during a priestly flutter for safe and sane bets at the hippic run fields of breezy Baldoyle on a date. WW goes through the card, easily capable of remembrance by all pickers up of events national and Dublin details, the doubles of Perkin and Pollock, Peer and Prole, when the classic Anchorage Hackney plate was captured by two noses and a stablecloth finish, heck and neck, sum and num, hevel o nevel Buffalo from the Cream Count Boy Cromwell after a clever getaway by Captain Shatton, Blount's Rogue, Henry St. Dollock, Drummer Coxon, Nondebic Third, and Breakneck Odds. Thanks to you great little, bonny little, porty little, witty witcher. You're all their nappies, who in his never-lit, mudded, popular cap was surely leagues unlike any other fantasy that ever toppled our timber maggies. 'Twas too pissing on's Tim Coves. The weather is pest, the wrens are overt, and common the vogues of the tuffer is hurtled on our land. Or the name of Treacle Tom, as was just out of pop following the theft of a leg of Kehoe Donnelly and Pakenham's finished pork, and his own blood and milk brother Frisky Shorty. He was, to be exquisitely punctilious about them, both Shorty and Frisky. A tipster, come off the hoax, both them awful poor. What was out on the bum around for an off-board game, for a Jimmy O'Goblin or a small tickleness chanced while the Seaforths was making the Colleen Ball, to hear the passing and the motor clubber make use of his law language, and so on, touching the case of Mr. Adams. What was in all the Sundays about it, which he was rubbing noses with, and having a gurgle off his own along with the butty bloke in the specs. This Treacle Tom, to whom reference has been made, had been absent from his usual wild and woolly haunts in the lands of counties Capelines for some time previous to that. He was, in fact, in the habit of frequenting common lodging houses where he slept in a nude state. A fellow with meth, in strange men's cots. But on race night, blotto after divers tots of hellfire, Red Biddy, Bulldog, Blue Ruin, and Creeping Jenny, Eglantide's choicest herbage, supplied by the Duck and Doggies, the Galloping Primrose, Bridget Brewster's, the Cock, the Postboy's Horn, the Little Old Man's, and Saul Swell that ain't swell, the cup and the stirrup, he sought his well-warmed lababo bed in a housing room abide with one another at Block WW. Why didn't he back it? Pump court the liberties. And what with molta puke on volta puke re-snored alcohol headedly to the burden of my come my purse delayed num. And the substance of the tale of the evangelical busybody and the ruse of Albion, the girls he would keep calling them for the collarette and skirt, the sunbonnet and carnation, in parts it seemed he was before the Ides of Martyrs or otherways, but the thirds of fossil years he having the ham with Katya when Lavinia's at her men's least to sea in a ship doodly show whereat he was looking for fight with royal horses, huffed in the chilly night. The metagonistic, the epic, the lamorous. During uneasy slumber in their hearings of a small and stony broke cast draper's executive, Peter Cloran, discharged. O'Mara, an ex-private secretary of no fixed abode, locally known as Mildew Liza, who had passed several nights, foolish enough, in a doorway under the blankets of homelessness on the bunk of Iceland, pillowed upon the stone of destiny colder than man's knee or woman's breast. And Hosty, no slouch of a name, an ill-starred beach busker, with sans rooty and sans scrapey, suspicioning as how he was sitting on a twode stool on the verge of self-abyss, most starved. Melancholy over everything in general. Night bombing you served him with Nattigale's nano. I've been tossing on his shakes down, devising ways and manners and means of what he loved, to find a licence somewhere other in the nation, getting hold of chum chap's parabellum, in the hope of taking a wing sociable Lighting upon a side-wheel dive somewhere off the Dalkeith down Lerry and Bleak Bucky Tramaline, where he could throw through and go and blow the simple side of napper off himself for 2 bits the boldly well altitude of the peace and quietness of a one sure shot bottle. He, after having tried all he knew with the lady's help of Madam Gristle for upwards of 18 calendars to get out of Sir Patrick Dunn's, through Sir Humphrey Jarvis's and into the St. Kevin's bed in the Adelaide hospitals. From these incurable Wellis lays, among those uncarable Wellis days, through St. Iago by his cockle had good Lazar deliver us, without ever having been able to jerry-wangle at any sides. Lisa O'Davis and Roche Mongan, who had so much in common episodically, if the phrase be permitted, hostis et odor et super petra perfectus, as an understood thing, slept their sleep of the swim-born in the one sweet undulant mother of tumbler bunks with Hosty. Just how the shavers in the Shah, the yokels in the yotes, or well, the wasters in the wild, and the bustling tweeny dawn of all works, mead of anthems here we pant. Had not been many jiffies furbishing pot lids, door brasses, scholars' apple cheeks, and link boys' metals when sharper-minded like no fella he go make big fuss longer white man, rejuvenated busker. For after a good night's rave and rumble and a shinkham's top morning with his coaxes, he was not the same man. And his broad-awake bedroom suite, boys, as our Byron called them, were up in the shuffle from the hogs home they loved named the Barrel, cross Eblin's chilled hamlet. The high roots and restings of their dead superficies curiously corresponded with those Lydia and Pugta, where our tubbenny halfpenny metro many plums below the Oberflake on the rails and stations at this time arriving. To the thrummings of a cruise fiddle, which Cremone and Cronon and levy-grevy, witty and wevy, appy, leppy and playable, caressed the ears of the subjects of King St. Finity the Festive, who in brick homes of their own and in their flavoury Fraseberry beds, he'dn't hardly cry of honeyman, sowed lavender or fine salmon alive, with their priggish mouths all open for the larger appreciation of this long-awaited messiah of oratorios, were only half past at sweep, and after a brisk pause at a pawnbroking establishment for the pathetic purpose of redeeming the songster's truly admirable false teeth, and a prolonged visit to a house of call at Coota's Place, viz. The old Sat's Hall, in the parish of St. Cecily, within the liberty of Kjolmore, not 1,001 national leagues I was by Griffith's valuation, from the sight of the statue of Primure Glasstone, setting a match to the march of the Maker, last of the Stewards Peut-être, where the tale rambles along. The trio of whack fowl that did us was joined by a further intentions apply tomorrow casual and decent sort of had-been variety, who had just been touching the weekly insult, fuet, and all thick blabbers, who saith of noun and stimulants in the shape of G and G's, stood by the damn decent sort, after which stag luncheon and a few ones more just to celebrate yesterday, flushed with their fire-stuff fostered friendship, the rascals came out of the licensed premises. Brown's first, the small PSX executive, cap a hand in their sad rear like a lady's postscript. I want money, please send. Whapping their life-leaking lipes on their sleeves. How the Berkeleys shout their ruskin generally. Shane Fion's the one. And the rhymer's world was with reason the richer for a would-be ballad. To the ballader of which the world of humanity singing owes a tribute for having placed on the planet's mellow map his lay of the vilest bowyer, but most attractionable avatar the world has ever had to explain for. This, more correctly Lubine or Felony Leader, was first poured forth where Rio Livio riots and Kuldu Hoodoo humps under the shadow of the monument of the should-have-been legislature. Eleutherodiodendron, spare woodman spare, to an overflow meeting of all the nations in Leinster, fully filling the visional area, and as a single-minded super crowd, easily representative, what with masks, what with faces, of all sections and cross-sections, wine shop and cocoa house poured out the brim up the broaching of our Liffey side people, to omit a mention of the mainline minority, and such as had wayfared via Watling, Earn and Icknold and Stane, and chief a haunted Cockney car with its quotal of Hardmuth's hacks, a northern Tory of southern Wick, an East Anglian chronicler and a Landwester Guardian, ranging from slips of young Dubliners from Cutpurse Row, having nothing better to do than walk about with their hands in their knee pads, sucking airwhacker we dulles at jumbo bricks, side by side with truant officers, 3 woolen bars and poplin in search of a close upon, to busy professional gentlemen and a brace of palesmen with Dundrearies nooning towards dailies, fresh from snipe hitting and mallard missing in Rutland Heath, exchanging cold sneers. Mass-going ladies from Hume Street in their chairs, the bears baited, some wandering hammerlags out of the adjacent clover field of Moss's Garden, an oblate faith from Skinner's Alley, bricklayers, a Fleming in Tabinet Fumont, with spouse and dog, an aged hammersmith who had some chisellers by the hand, about a cudgel players, not a few sheep with the braxy, 2 blue-coat scholars, 4 broke gents out of Simpson's on the Rock, a portly and a pert still tassin' turkey coffee at Orange Shrub and Tickey's door, Peter Pym and Paul Fry, and Ben Elliot and Atkinson, suffering hell's delights from the blains of their Newton's acorns, not forgetting the Juice of Diana's riding for the hunt, a particularist prebendary pondering on the Roman Easter, the tonsure question, and the Greek units, plunkum, a lace-lapped head or 2 or 3 or 4 from a window, and so on down to a few good old souls, who, as they were juiced after taking their pledge over at the uncle's place, were evidently under the spell of liquor. From the wake of Terry the tailor, a fair girl, a jolly postboy thinking of 3 flagons in one, a plummadrow, a half-sir from the weaver's almshouse who clings and chat clings to her, a whole damn's cloud-hued petticoat, as child, as Curie later, as Quake O'Leary. The war arrow went round, so it did. A nation wants a gaze. And the ballad, in the Philibrine Tancope metre affection by Tautubo, in his Cassudus the Pulichinero or to Hut, stump stampeded onto a slip a blank of vide, and headed by an excessively rough and red wood cut, privately printed at the rhyme press of Delville, soon fluttered its secret on white highway and brown byway, to the rose of the winds and the blue of the gales, from archway to lattice and from black hand to pink ear, village crying to village, through the 5 Pussifors green of the United States of Scotia Picta, and he who denies it may his hairs be rubbed in dirt, to the added strains, so peaceful, of His Majesty the Flute, that one croon king of inscrutments, Pegasus purist, cello assoluto, which Mr. De Lacy, horn, anticipating a perfect downpour of plaudits among the rhapsods, piped out of his decent sword hat, looking still more like his Percival namesake, as men of Gaul noted, but before of the spot about, the snowy crested curl a moist to the leader's wild and molting hair, Dr. Hitchcock hoisted in his fezzy fuzzed bludgeon's height, signum to his companions of the chalice for the loud fellow boys, and silentium in curia. Our maypole once more where he rose of old, and the canto was chanted there, chorus and christened where? By the old toll gate, St. Anana's Street and Church, and around the lawn the ran it ran. And this is the ran that Hosty made. Spoken. Boyles and Cahill's, Skerritts and Pritchards, versified and piercified may the treathweight tale of living Stoney. Here line the refrains of. Some vote him Vike, some vote him Mike. Some dub him Lynn and Finn, while others hail him Lug, Bug, Dan, Lop, Lex, Lax, Gun or Gin. Some apt him Arth, some bapt him Barth. Call, Nall, Saul, Wheel, Wall, but I parse him Purse O'Reilly, as he's called no name at all. Together. Leave it to Hosty, Frosty Hosty, leave it to Hosty, for he's the man to rhyme the ran, the king of all rans. Have you heard? Some ha. Have we wear? Some hat. Have you heard it? Others do. Have we wear it? Others don't. It's coming. It's brumming. The clip, the clop, all class crash, the click, cack, lack, cack, lass, cack, clop, as class, cack, batter, creppy, crotty, grata, semi, new with a bloody, cup of cat. Ardite! Arditi. Music cue. The Ballad of Perce O'Reilly. Have you heard of one Humpty Dumpty? How he fell with a roll and a rumble, and fell off like Ladal of a crumple by the butt of the magazine wall, Hump, helmet, and all. He was one time our king of the castle. Now he's kicked about like a rotten old parsnip, and from Green Street he'll be sent by order of his worship to the penal jail of Montjoy, jail him and joy. He was father of all schemes for to bother us, slow coaches and immaculate contraceptives for the populace, mare's milk for the sick, 7 dry Sundays a week, open air love and religious reform, hideous inform. Arrow says you couldn't manage him. I'll go bail my fine dairyman darling, like the bumping bull of the Cassidys. Your butter is in your horns. His butter is in his horns. Butter his horns. Hurrah there, Frosty Hasty, change that short on you. Rhyme the Rad, the king of all Rads. Balbaccio. We had chops, chairs, chewing gum, the chicken pox and china chambers, universally provided by this soft-soaping salesman. Small wonder he'll cheat Erdogan. Our local lads nicknamed him when Chimpton first took the floor with his book of chop store down back and weg lower. So snug was he in his hotel premises, sumptuous. But soon we'll bonfire all his trash tricks and trumpery, and he's sure to Sheriff Clancy be winding up his unlimited company with the bailiff's bum at the door. Bang bang at the door, then he'll bum no more. Sweet bad luck on the waves washed to our island. The hooker of that hammer-fast Viking, and girls curse on the day when Eblana Bay saw his black and tan man of war. Saw his man of war on the harbour bar. Where from? Roars Pilbeg. Cooking halfpence, he bars. Dunnewas Scampittle. We can wipe and fappity. Fingal McOscar, one sign bar jars Boniface, Foxman Gamelhole, Norvig Gickers moniker, Argus IR at Gamelhor, Norvig Gickers cod, a Norwegian Camel cod. He is me God. Lifted hosty, lifted ye devil ye, up with the rad, a rhyming rad. It was during some fresh water garden pumping, or according to the Northern Mirror, while admiring the monkeys, that our heavyweight heathen Humphrey made bold a maid to woo. What'll she do? The general lost her maiden room. He ought to blush for himself, the old hay-headed philosopher, for to go and shove himself that way on top of her. Begob, he's a crux of the catalogue of our antediluvial zoo. Messrs. Billings and Coo. Noah's larks, good as new. He was jolted by Wellington's monument, Aratorius hippopotamus, when some bugger let down the back track of the omnibus and he caught his death of Fusiliers with his rent in his rears. Woo! Give him 6 years. 'Tis sore pity for his innocent poor children, but look out for his missus legitimate. When that flu gets a grip of old Earwick, won't there be earwigs on the green? Big earwigs on the green, the largest ever you see. Suffolk Close, Shakespeare, Pseudo-Danto, and Annie Moses. Then we'll have a free trade Gales band and mass meet for to sod the brave son of Scandinavia, and we'll belly him down in Oxman's town along with the devils and Danes, with the deaf and dumb Danes, and all their remains. And not all the king's men or his horses will resurrect his corpus, for there's no true spell in Connaught or hell that's able to raise a Cain, that's able to raise a Cain. Sit down, I've got chapter 3 here.